Chapter 9. The Heirs of Freedom. On and up the wings drove him, soaring towards the white clouds while the land plummeted away beneath, and the airs of the heights streamed by, cool and exhilarating as new wine. The very power of their beat was intoxicating, awesome, for they felt almost like limbs of his own. And in those moments, the maiming of his legs diminished in his mind. The shadow it had cast over him dispersed. In the face of such overwhelming strength and freedom, it scarcely seemed to matter anymore. What he had lost was made good 1,000-fold. He shouted aloud and sang for the sheer joy of it. He had passed through the fires and was made whole again. A soft air surged beneath him, rising from the sun-warmed land, and he spread his wings and rode it easily as any bird. It came to him as an instinct. Had he not worn bird shape many a time? Few who had not could have mimicked their flight so closely. None controlled it, for the wings were made in every detail as he remembered them, able to move in the same complex patterns, to sweep and angle and shift their shape. He had modeled them on the feather Kara had left him, even to the tiny barbs that link each frond of the quill into a single surface. His material, the dark substance of the filament, light yet strong, with traces of gold to line it that could bear the virtues he needed. Yet though he flew thus as he had flown before, it was different, better. Now he was not cramped by the helm's powers into the mask of another shape, nor did it tell upon his strength, save to guide the flight with slight shifts of shoulder and thigh, for not even his steely arms could have freed him so from the clutch of earth. It was the gems of the corsetlet, drinking in the radiance of the sun as they had the furnace glare, that through the subtle virtues of the gold caused the woven web to shift and stiffen, expanding and contracting as the thews of a living frame. He was stronger and greater now than anything else that took the air, save a dragon or some other unnatural fosterling of the ice. Even the eagles of the Nordenbergen, shadows across the moon in his childhood, even the condors of the Menethskahas that came drifting down like dark clouds upon the slain of many battles, had scarcely half that awesome span. The shadow he cast was huge, and looking down and back, he saw it pass at an incredible speed over the darkening blue waters of the great river, over golden shores and green fields and forests and brown walls of town and tower, as free as himself. He did not then notice, not consciously, the dark specks against the distant clouds that kept pace with him nonetheless. That first night took him far from Elan Gorenhayen. How far? He had no idea. As the sun sank, so the power in his wings began to dwindle, and the high airs grew colder. He had expected this, and looked for a place to settle. He chose at last to land on the outskirts of a lonely wood, far beyond the towns, on a narrow spot of riverbank protected by thorn thickets. Drink he had from the river, but he had not had time to bring any food. Save for a few coins in his belt, he had carried off only his precious tool pack, the arm ring and seal at his breast, and Gorthar at his side once more. And that seemed to him more than enough. Above all, he had his freedom. As darkness fell, he folded his wings about him, and was surprised at how sheltering and warm they were. A great weariness took him then, and he slept. Lulled by the soft ripple of the stream, the whisperings of the trees, he did not dream. Birdsong awoke him, and he laughed to find himself spreading wings of his own in the dim light. He washed swiftly and drank, finding his burns healing cleanly, and kindled a great fire with his flints to feed his wings. The gems drank it to dark ashes in minutes, and he sprang up with the sun, high into its first light. He felt hollow with hunger, light as a foam bubble, and still did not notice the distant followers. What concerned him was food. When he saw two peasants breakfasting outside a cottage, he swooped down to them, but they bolted like maddened horses in opposite directions. Fortunately, they left their food. It was rough country fare, coarse bread, goat cheese, and summer fruits, but to his heightened senses, no less than a feast. He ate swiftly between gulps of rough wine, impatient to be aloft once more, and ere he rose again, he threw down one of his gold coins in payment. It occurred to him, though the coin might have bought the cottage twice over, that for all their fright, it might mean even more to them to have such a tale to tell. It was then, beating up through the sky once more in a great spiral, that he first truly noticed the wings far off. But he thought no more of them all that day. So full was his mind of the joys of freedom and of the heights. He tested his wings to the full, riding ever higher on the warm air streams till he was among the clouds, sporting in and out of their chill contours as he might in water, and at last rising higher still, to where the sunlight grew sharper and the air thinner, till a tight band began to close about chest and temples, and his wings seemed to be losing their force. Then he plunged down in a long sweeping glide towards a swirling fountain of clouds, awaiting the moment when they would part like curtains before him and the great veil of Charis burst out like a bright banner beneath. Suddenly, he was in trouble. The sun was blotted out, and for a moment of horror, he thought he had somehow fallen back into his crumbling forge. Sulphur boiled in his mouth and nose, hot ashes stung his eyes, cindery particles lit agonizingly upon flesh too recently raw. A vast exhalation seemed to fill the universe, louder than a storm wind, but all too like the last breaths of a man half buried. He could have believed himself in the clutch of ghosts then, save that far beneath him there sounded a deafening explosion. The floating dust was blasted upward, branding his skin with new pain, and behind it the air filled with enormous masses, whose passage he felt as much as saw. Huge flowing gobbets the size of a house cutting the air with an eerie whistle, trailing a wake of red-hot turbulence that tumbled him madly down the sky. Another blast, and this time a shower of such gobbets almost smashed into his left wingtip. He knew now where he was, and that he must flee or die. He folded his wings and dived like a swimmer through the murk. Another concussion, and a spraying bolt past where he had been a 10th second before, sent him spinning like the merest leaf away and out of the cloud and into clean sky. The air seemed to sing around him as he spread his wings and fought to break his descent, the huge pinions lashing the air. Low over the waters of the Ischianus, he swooped till it seemed he must be sent skipping across their crests as a boy will skim a stone. But at last he managed to pull up and take the sun on his shoulders once again. He looked back as he circled for height beneath the spreading ash cloud, riding on the very airs that had threatened his doom, and saw the fire mountain blast again, spewing its glowing lava skyward. A volley of small stones passed beneath him, and he banked hurriedly across a glowing torrent of earth fire to ride the heat that rose from it. It was an eruption greater than any he had heard of before in those lands, as great as any he knew of in the Nordenbergen where he grew up. The ash cloud towered over the mountain, hanging as if motionless in the air, high enough to mask the sun from the lands beyond. Its shadow lay far across them in the likeness of an arm, upraised and threatening. Around a widening spiral he flew, and was high enough now to catch a glimpse of startling contrast in the distance. The ramparts of the ice glittering beneath the sun in all their deathly stillness. A contrast indeed, each with an awesome ability to destroy and lay waste. Abilities totally opposed, but with the same results. A land blasted and sterile. Strange that so often they should layer together. And at their fiercest, ice and earth fires in the Nordenbergen. And now here. Could there be some link? Could Loki be out to make use of them somehow? If there were powers of the fires, or whether there were or not, could there be some more material link? The fires had grown worse here as the ice advanced, as it ground down the land, crushing it beneath its overwhelming weight. His spiral swept him through the shadow of the cloud. He shivered violently, and his wings seemed to falter, though they had plenty of power left them. These windy airs, the sun's warmth banished, were suddenly bitterly cold. He passed out of the shadow into sunshine so warm and bright it felt almost like a caress. The chill remained with him nonetheless, sinking deep into his bones. He shifted his weight a little, and without seeking greater heights, he struck out to the westward again. He had begun to understand. The land sped by beneath him. The clean air whistled past and soothed his burns once more, and his mood of exhalation returned. Less concerned now with the sheer marvel of his flight, he began to enjoy the view, to seek the sight of places he recognized or had been told of. Only now did the full extent of the land of Caris come home to him. Only now did he begin to understand the might upon which the great city was founded. A vast land opened beneath him, an expanse even that first sight from the cliffs had not prepared him for. There, where the vale was narrowest, he had seen only a miniature, a model of the true extent of the land. From the height he now enjoyed, he could look across great sweeps of field and forest to the northern wall of Caris Vale, and the wild lands beyond. Or he could turn his gaze southward, and see for the first time the Yeskiennis's farther shores, and the different hues of the warmer southlands. The grassy meadows yellowed by midsummer, the light green of orchard and wood, the grain fields fast ripened to gold, and above them, on the slopes of the vale, the long stretches of dark green olive grove and fig orchard, the brown of vineyard and scrubby goat pastures. So clear was the air that he could make out among them the larger coastal towns, with their walls lime-washed in dazzling whites and their roof tiles green rather than red. Kerberheim had adopted that style. In the south, man's dominion did not stop at the margins of the vale, but went on further than the eye could reach, into the shimmering haze of distance where the southern deserts began. Once it had been so in the north also. Beyond the cliff tops, a tamed country, rustic but civilized, much like Norderney, that had been his home and settled by the ancestors of its folk. Now it was a haunted half-barrens he and Rock had escaped through, helpless before the inexorable advance of the ice, and the scars of war that had made it so had spread down into the very vale itself. He slept that night beneath the trees of an outlying orchard, overgrown and neglected this season. It yielded him some food, and its fallen boughs a sweet-scented fuel for his ascent next morning. By noon that day, less than 2 days after the fall of the forge, he reckoned he had come the distance it had taken Trikegar's cog well-nigh 7 days to sail. Prompted by that thought, he looked up and down the great river, but there were few ships of any size abroad. He saw the distant wings then, a pair of flyers as fast as himself, and curiously, he swung towards them. But they scattered in panic, as what birds might not before something as huge as he. Ever westward as he flew, he saw more signs of war. At first, those that the greater towns were inflicting upon themselves in their frantic haste to build new fortifications on his pattern. Many an ancient building was torn down for the materials, and the lands about gouged up with trench and dike. But soon he came upon sharper devastations. Wide slashes brown and black across the green earth below where holt and hamlet had been overrun and fired. Walls tumbled or whitened with flame. Fields trampled to muck, pastures empty of beast and herdsman. A wide ring of such ruin marked out many of the greater towns from afar. That next evening he slept well in a proper bed with blankets, high in an abandoned tower, but he slept hungry. Every morsel of food seemed to have been stripped from the lands around. Hardly a bird sang, and no small creatures disturbed the undergrowth in darkness. At dawn, as he was kindling a fire upon the tower top, he heard the approach of horses, and looked out, saw a patrol of horse soldiers, come to investigate the smoke. He had no wish for trouble with them, but he had little cause to worry. When he spread his wings across the tower top, the horses neighed madly and bolted, their riders making no great effort to restrain them. Elof was surprised at how fearsome he seemed to be. Perhaps word of the sorcerer who had slain the king and flown away had reached them. Yet, why should he scare the horses? Puzzled, he kicked the ashes apart, and, rising upon the parapet, he launched himself out in a great glide. His quest for rising airs took him far out over the Escianus, and when he passed high over 2 large cogs speeding southward, he decided to try diving down towards them. One might be Trikegar's, and if not, he could at least see how the sailors reacted. It was almost the end of him, for even as he came gliding down the sky, confident in his invulnerability aloft, he saw a flurry of activity at the lee gunwales, but was slow to realize what it must be. He lurched aside just in time as the spurt of flame roared up at him. His swooping escape took him across the other ship's sails, and so only arrows were launched at him, but he left them far behind, and soared high to safety once again. very thoughtful. They had fired before they could possibly have made out what he was, the moment they had seen something with wings. What had they learned to fear out here in what had become the forward lines of the war? That night he huddled, hungrier than ever, in the lee of 4 broken walls, and burned the fallen timbers for his morning fire in the damp dawn. The scoured land offered little else. Yet this was still within the lines. No enemies had passed here save a few reavers. Even the defending forces had left desolation in their wake. And not only they, for as he took to the air again, he saw snaking across the land ahead what seemed the worst and ugliest scar of all. But it was not long before he could recognize it for the great line of defenses he himself had planned, yet never seen. It held still, for the banner of Caris flew bravely above its battlements, but it was severely marked as by repeated assaults, and in places its outer lines looked from above as if someone had beaten on them with a vast cudgel. Bodies unburied were strewn like chaff about all the ground before, partly burned, but still all too recognizable. He did not dare dive closer, lest the fire be turned on him also. Westward still he flew, and followed over many a forest and field the bruising tracks of wholesale war, the devastation that attends the passage of great armies and their meeting. Long swaths of gray-black ash streaked the hills, and he knew that his fire weapons had been at work here. At times the devastation was so wide-swept, it seemed as though duelists had slashed at each other with vast swords of flame. Nothing moved in the land below him, and save for distant dots now and again, the airs were no less empty. Here and there, all too often, his wings shadowed low mounds set about with rustling spears, to mark where men who would defend their soil had at last become part of it. As in a vision, a sound of lamentation rose to him, faint but clear, the weeping of countless voices, the groans of overburdened hearts, and he never knew whence it came, whether by some trick of the airs he heard what passed far beneath, or whether, as one blended out of many, the voice of Caris itself cried out to him. The earth had swallowed blood here, and sickened of it. It was a land laid waste, marred as a sword cut mars a fair face, and healing was a long way off. The winds that hissed through the shattered forests called after him, bidding him make haste. The rolling music of the wide waters below urged him on. Fly, Elof, fly! You are destiny now. He had no reply. He could only speed on his way, chasing the sun down the sky till evening. There lay his only hope. He could do no more for the land. That last night of his journey he spent huddled in the lee of a stand of resinous thorn bushes, sleeping little, watchful for intruders, and in the morning he had to fire it to charge his wings. He rose swiftly and banked away towards the great river. As the day passed he saw it narrow beneath him, and the cliffs beyond begin to converge. He had come a good part of the length of Caris, and ahead of him, when he rose high enough, he could see the gate as a minute blur of gray where the cliffs converged, far ahead. 2 weeks' journey by ship he had matched in the space of less than 5 days. Though he had left earlier, Rock could not possibly have kept up. He must find one of the places they had chosen as safe tryst. The shores were bleak and eerie places now, and his heart rebelled at risking a night on them. here where the ice's terrors walked abroad. He settled at last upon one of the islands he and Rock had first seen from the cliff tops, many years since. It seemed at first as if war had not touched this lightly wooded little crescent of land, till, in searching the island before the sun sank, he came upon a small beach scarred by a ship's keel, and above the waterline, still recognizable, the ashes of fires. He landed, kneeling, and found they were cold, but his raking fingers uncovered bones that were unmistakable. Ekwesh reavers must have held some right here to the ice they served, for even they did not eat the flesh of men as casually as any other. He rose in fury and buried the ashes with the thunderous downdraft of his wings. Then he settled in shelter high up on the island. Gorthar, unused since he recovered it, seemed to nuzzle his hand like an eager hound, and he found himself wishing those reavers would come back. But he was weak with hunger, and knew the idea was folly. Berries grew on the island, and he managed to catch some small crabs and roast them. Poor fare for a man who had eaten little for days, but it would keep his strength for tonight. Tomorrow he would try hunting, and find some way to fish. That should keep him alive until Rock came. He should not be long. For all their sakes, he had better not be. "Well, you haven't withered away anyhow," was that worthy's only comment, some 5 days later. "Not quite," Elof admitted, between gulped mouthfuls of the hot stew they had brought him. He set it down a moment to cool, and took a long pull at a pitcher of ale. Oh, it felt like it at times. Poor hunting. I expected that. But the fishing as well? Surely even armies couldn't deplete that. Not when they were mostly ashore. Maybe Trikarl knows something. But the old shipmaster was busy getting the cog under way. Already the anchor was clanking up the side, and the sail booming out overhead. He spared Elof no more than a curt but friendly wave. "He won't linger in these open waters, lest he attract a stolen lugger full of hungry reavers. Ah, well, you got through. That's what matters." He patted the massive wings outstretched on the deck. "Must have been quite a show. Sorry I missed it. And these. I'm disappointed. I was looking to see you swooping down on our mastheads, not hailing for a boat from shore." "So you might have, if another cog hadn't set flame on me at sight." Rock blew out his cheeks. "Aye, that's reason enough for care. Can't altogether blame 'em, though. You must have been a pretty fearsome sight. And if they'd heard about Nethade—" "No," objected Elof, swallowing a mouthful of stew too quickly. "The news couldn't have traveled that fast. Not to a ship far from the nearest town. Anyway, they were racing to fire while I was still well aloft, before they could have seen anything but wings. And some cavalry ashore bolted at just the sight of wings." Rock tapped his broad foot on the deck. "You're saying they've reason to fear wide wings." Then he stood up straight. "Ah, no. You're not thinking—" "Kara," said Elof flatly. "Yes, I am." For a minute their glances locked, but then Trikar, seeing the cog well under way, felt able to leave the helm for a word, and hastily they changed the subject. "For fishing here," he repeated incredulously. "Why, man, it's the better part of the river, saltier for the sea fish." "Then do you try your luck," said Olaf sourly. "Trawl a few lines and try. Line and spear. I've tried both, from land and from above. And I've lived by fishing before. Not so much as a sprat. The waters are empty. That's it, and all about it." Tryggar shook his shaggy white head in puzzlement, and found no answer. 8 years had changed him little, save to bow his shoulders a trace. He bellowed as vigorously as ever at a young seaman ambling by. "My youngest," he said, jerking his thumb at the lad with evident pride as he scurried off. Olaf stared. "You're bringing a son on this voyage?" "Shipmaster, it's a deadly dangerous venture. Would you risk him?" Tryggar chuckled dryly. "They're half of this crew, my lads, Master Smith, and the rest close kin, or good northerners. Comes to much the same. I'd ha' brought my old wife along, if she were living yet. Sooner than leave her here. The perils of the sea can't be worse. Stand or fall, I fear Carousel never be what it was. She's too far gone." "There's wisdom in that. We cannot hope to restore it to what it once was. At best, we may salvage some hope for its people. I do not regret what I have done. But for the land's sake, I wish it could have been otherwise. Without a strong king." "Without Methade, you mean?" The Tryggar hawked and spat overside. "He wasn't strong. No more than his father and grandfather before him. Save as brutes are strong, and that's the wrong way. The land's well rid of that line. I served them all, I know, and I want something better for my lads." "Judge of our land and our king, then," said Olaf. "Your kin have a new home for the asking, shipmaster." "I'd that in mind," said the old man judiciously, "given he knows the worth of a good sailor, mind." "None better," grinned Rock, "him having been a seafarer himself in his wild youth. But if we're trying to save anything in that realm or this, we must make haste, shipmaster." Tryggar jerked his thumb at the taut sail. "I don't call that dawdling. We're running for the southern shore now. But we'll have to beach her in another day or so, anyhow. Daren't get too close to the gate." "Daren't?" blazed Olaf. "We'll have to. We can't carry stores so far overland." "Well, Master Smith, let me give you the same answer. We'll have to. By day the gate guards would spot us afar off, and by night, well, it's a madman's risk. That's a rocky shore, beset with shallows and rough water. The flow from the falls through the lakes is fierce, and the nearer the gate, the worse it gets." Olaf considered. "There you know best, shipmaster. But to trudge overland for days, laden with supplies, that too could well get us spotted. At the very least, it will put the Ekwesh on guard if they find our tracks. But suppose—" He bent and stroked the plumes at his feet. "Suppose you had a watcher who could pass over the waters ahead, spy out such obstacles, even in the dark. Trikar looked at him in great wonder. You can do that? Then by various sweet apples, we might just risk it. So it was that in the dimming end of twilight, 2 evenings hence, a shape was flitting about the river that, from afar, might have been a great black bat in search of fat moths. It settled itself at last upon the foredeck of the cog, and the light of an uncovered brazier flared briefly beneath the wide-spread wings. Then it was as quickly quenched as they folded and enveloped it. It was an eerie sight, and Elof was acutely aware of the white-rimmed eyes of the watching sailors. "It's nearly clear now," he whispered urgently to Trikar. "Round the point, skirt the sandbar there, and some jagged rocks well under the surface, and there's a sheltered little bay, fine for a beaching." Trikar gave a curt nod, hissed a command, and the eyes vanished in a flurry of motion. Elof spread his wings, wider even than the cog, and let himself fall forward on the air. It was cloudy, moist and still, strangely tense and breathless, as if it had caught their excitement, and flying was cooling relief. Over the bows he glided and circled over the channel the cog must follow. As had happened once or twice already, the tip of a rock gouged into the protesting timbers. Depths were hard to judge. Even skimming the very surface of the water, it sounded deafening in the stillness, and Elof winced. But no great damage was done, and the cog rode free into haven. There was still force in his wings, and finding a light updraft from the land, he swooped high over the tangled forest, spying out signs of movement, yet took care not to rise above the slope and be silhouetted against the stars. The forest was silent and still, save for the scufflings of the tiniest beasts, and greatly encouraged, he sank to the treetops and ventured a closer look at the grim bulk that bridged that narrow vale, no great distance ahead. His teeth clenched with a snap as he saw the lights that burned yellow in the upper windows. But he forgot the dreadful memories that aroused when he noticed that there were no outside lights at all. Normally sentries needed a few, at least, to save them slipping down long stairwells or over low balustrades. Here there were none, and not a single guard to be seen. He did not know what to make of that. But then his wing beat began to falter, and banking swiftly in the air, he glided back down to the cog. Its barrel hull looked absurd, canted over to one side in the shallows. From the side a frenetic unloading had already begun, with figures scuttling ant-like up and down the gangplanks. A few, Rock among them, made no move to help, but stood with bows to hand, watching the forest. With little force in his wings, Elof landed awkwardly, and they ran to help him. "Safe, I think," he gasped. "Even up by the gate. No guards. Nothing stirs there. And yet—" "And yet," echoed Rock with a shiver. "We'll take no chances passing that place by. How goes it, Trikar?" "Well on, Master Rock. First on the portage sleds, loaded to the limit. The others, almost. 5 men to a sled, and we'll manage what's left on our backs. And swiftly, for I smell a storm in the air." The old man paused, embarrassed. "But what of you, Master Smith? These paths will be too steep for you. Will you ride on one of the sleds, or shall we carry you also?" Elof felt his blood race. He could not go back to being a cripple, a mere burden. Not now. Neither. Kindle me a good fire, and I'll fly. Rock growled. Would we agree? What if you're seen? In this haze? A bird, that's all. There's no telling distance or detail. Besides, what if I'm needed aloft on the far side? We can't just stop and build a fire there. True, said Trikar decisively. I'll have it laid, but not lit. You must wait till we're hard by the crown of the hill. Then, if it is seen, they'll at least start looking in the wrong place, and you can catch us up in minutes. So it was agreed, and as the little party began its long haul up the slope, Elof was left, doubly helpless under his powerless wings, to watch the cog steered out by its 3 remaining crewmen. Since they were moving with the current now, they had less trouble in regaining the main stream and heading west again. It would be a long time before they were in safe waters once more, but how much longer for him? An hour passed, and another, more wearisome. He looked at the fire and at the heavy clouds overhead. A breath of cold air stirred the heavy leaves around him, ruffled the plumage of his wings. Was that a distant rumble? At the first drop of rain, he would have to light the fire, or risk being stuck here. But some of the summer storms came on very quickly and heavily. He twisted around and his keen eyes pierced the murky air, following the slight disturbance high among the trees that marked the progress of the sleds. Marked where a brace of birds flew up, squawking in alarm at the intruders. They were making good time, better than he had feared, but they must be tiring. Plodding along on legs that felt like molten lead, hot, heavy, and agonizing. He found himself pitying them. Flight seemed so natural to him already, his braced legs a minor hindrance. If there was a clear patch, he might even be able to help them with their burdens. He sat up straight. A chill droplet had touched the back of his neck. He looked up, and after a moment, another touched his cheek. That was more than enough. He fumbled desperately with the tinderbox they had left him, blew a glow into the shavings, and struggled to transfer it to the kindling of the fire. Powers, was it damp already? Down the vale from the southeast echoed a crackle, a rumble. The kindling steamed and sputtered and sizzled. Then quite abruptly it flared, a single yellow flame that spread into a wavering line. The wood above it blackened and caught. A sudden swirl of air only swelled it, and in minutes the pile was a roaring cone of flame. Above it hung the great wings, hiding its light, shielding it from the rain. Then they swept down, and in moments the droplets hissed upon spent embers from which the last glow had been drunk. The crystals in corsetlet and gauntlet had turned the fire back upon itself, redoubling its ferocity till the wood was consumed in an instant. Now the wings thrashed with its heat, and their wind scattered the ashes among the damp sand, dispersing even the smoke. Nobody would see it now. A flicker raced through the sky above the cliff tops, even as Elof rose from the beach and soared up the slope. The storm was following fast. He went leaping out of its gusty vanguard like a dolphin from a bow wave, and swooped down over the heads of his fellows as they reached the crest. but there was nowhere clear enough for him to land. He swept past and saw with alarm that he was circling past the upper levels of the high gate. They looked strange somehow, as if their luring profile had been changed. And still, he could see no guards. Then a blade of awful light smote across the sky. Somewhere far behind him, the lightning struck, blazed through the heavy air, and the high gate stood out stark in its glare. Elof recoiled at what he saw there, for it was not that the profile of the tower had been changed. Above the colonnades, curled protectively around the circumference of the tower, he looked upon a vast length of back, all set with scales like smooth iridescent shields. The curving flank of a body narrow only in proportion to the thing's sheer size. Above it lay folded wings that dwarfed even his. One leg jutted out like a crazy angled buttress. The vision came and went in an eye blink. Darkness returned, and hot red images behind his eyes. Then the thunderclap came, a tearing, unending crash, and the air took hold and shook him. At the far end of the tower, scales rattled, and a huge head lifted and swung like a ship's spar. Yellow eyes larger than Elof's head cast about, this way and that, malevolent glitters in the renewed blackness. Rigid with fright, he let himself fall, drift down on stiffened wings, cursing himself for not having been warned by the sights he had seen. Great flame scars on the earth, a land devoid of food, sailors and soldiers scared of the very sight of wings. And a sight this must be aloft, for it was twice the size of the dragons that had assailed the Duergar capital. In developing his fire weapons, he had forgotten that the ice could command a living flame of its own. Small wonder no sentinels need be posted. He was almost among the treetops before that huge head sank down again. It had missed him in the gloom. He turned wildly and went plunging after the others. He reached them just as they were about to cross the bare crown of the ridge, and was able to land among the thickets. "Makes little odds," said Rock, though he spoke from a dry throat. "We were going to beware of Ekwesh sentries anyway." This thing is sentry and army both, and it must move more swiftly than any aloft. If sentry spotted us, we might still get away, but not if it does. So they crept slowly across the clear land, lifting the laden sleds bodily rather than run them over even the slightest obstruction. Here Elof could help, for there was still power in his wings, and without the added strength in them and his own arms, they might not have managed, for they were weary after their climb. No man spared a thought for the view ahead till the sleds were under the trees lower down. But then Rock and Trikar slunk back up, with Elof above them casting many odd glances at the indistinct bulk on the terraces and cursing the gloom that made every shadow seem to move. They fell flat among low and tangled bushes, with Elof's wings to cover them, and took stock of what they saw. Against the ocean's faint glimmer, it seemed for a moment to them all as if the shore directly below the gate was lined with thickets of dead trees, stark and skeletal. Then lightning pulsed among the clouds, and by its glow Elof recognized them for the bare masts and spars of ships beached, or riding at anchor in inlets and streams. "Quite a bloody fleet," whispered Rock, "and no wagering whose. Look at the shape. Ekwesh longships, every one." "So much the better for us. Trikar, a few of the lads can get the supplies down the gentler slope to that point there, while we head down the steeper way. Then we can take them aboard as we head out." "But won't we need all of the crew too?" "I think not. Better to do this quietly, if we can, and with the rain to aid us. We might. By the way those fires are scattered about, they can't imagine an enemy coming within leagues of them, and there are no lights on the ships. I'd guess they'll have set no more than a token guard, and that mostly to watch the weather, or one clan thieving from another. And if that's so..." The rain came as they were scrambling down the precipitous slopes that flanked the gate, making an already perilous climb far worse. Elof flew, and more than once he had to rescue some unfortunate who slipped in the rivulets of mud that came gurgling down through the undergrowth. Every time the lightning flashed overhead, they froze, pressing themselves flat to the slope, while Elof swooped away to avoid drawing attention to them, fearful that at any moment he would see that vast yellow gaze staring down at him with the malign intelligence of a minor power. Its fire he might resist, but those jaws could pluck him from the air with a single bite. The storm lingered on the ocean's edge, as if waiting for a change of wind, and it took them a good 3 hours to reach the gentler slopes below the gate. They had come away no army could hope to, and they were exhausted and chilled. But here, of all places, on the margins of the Ekwesh encampments, they did not dare rest. Nor were they grateful when a lull came in the storm, for they had hoped it would cover their escape. Here and there, sentinels began to emerge from shelter and relight campfires, and one of those stood squarely in the way to the ships. So it was that a terrifying winged shadow descended suddenly upon that fire, and with a single sweep of its pinions snuffed it out. In that instant of darkness, other shapes swarmed over the stunned guard. The act was swift and merciless, and because of that it was silent. "Now light that fire again," ordered Trikar, "lest any of the other swine notice. We'll have to wait for the rain now." Elof held out a restraining hand. "Not necessarily. We will need the rain later, but meanwhile, there may be another way." Now he was high over the longship they had picked out, the guard no more than an outline leaning over the rail, gazing out into the bay as if listening to the soft boom of the surf under the rain. Perhaps at the last second he saw in the dark water astern some glimpse of what was coming, for he whirled swiftly about, his spear lifting, his mouth open to shout. But they were his last thoughts, his last acts, and he did not live to complete them. The next moment he was high in the air, breathless as a fish plucked from the ocean in the talons of the swooping raptor. He was a strong warrior, but those talons broke him and let him go. The other watchers heard no more than a faint splash from out in the bay. Lightning lanced down over the hills behind the gate. Thunder shook the air. Elof swooped low, hoping he looked no more than a large seabird, and skimmed the waves back to the ship, Gorthar in hand, ready to fall once again upon any who resisted there. But a familiar shape waved to him as agreed, and he settled swiftly to the deck. Any others? 3, all asleep in shelter. They never woke, and one in the next ship who chose that ill-starred moment to come on deck for a leak. I dropped him overside with an arrow before he even saw, like sheep in a stall, just slaughter. But hardly up to their own standards. Where's Trikar? Here, came a gruff whisper. As I thought. This one's newly rigged for sea. The rig looks fresh trimmed, and it is. But better we take her down to the point on oars. They're slower, but quieter. No, grinned Elof. Just get her afloat the moment the rain comes back. I'll see to the rest. With poles and sweep shafts as levers, they began to inch the longship down the beach, lifting anxious eyes to the skies. In this dimness, it was unlikely any guard would see much at first, until the longship began to move in earnest. Then the one mast moving would stand out among the rest, and they could not lower it without hindering their escape. It had better be raining again then. Lightning sizzled across the sky, thunder hard on its heels, and the masts stood out in stark relief. Every man froze in the glare as if it had struck him, but the ship's stern was already rocking slightly in the waves, the mast swaying visibly. Trikar let loose a stream of appalling oaths under his breath, but there was no disturbance. Probably this area was the responsibility of the sentries they had slain, and nobody else was paying it any attention. With that monster above their heads, thought Elof, they had some excuse for being complacent. Trikar passed him a heavy cable. He looped it over his shoulders, and they waited. Now and again a cold droplet would splash on arm or neck, but it was only the wind blowing them off spar or stay. It was a warm wind, but in his soaked jerkin it made him shiver. An angry tattoo of drops spattered on his neck, and he winced. Then came another. Then a few slow drops more struck him with mounting intensity and speed. He turned in sudden hope to look up at the clouds behind the heights of the gate, and felt a stab of sheer terror. Lightning clashed like twin lances against the tower, and he saw the immense body churn and stir like the sea, its scales dazzling with reflected glare, saw the spear-shaped head rear up, yellow eyes alight, jaws flung wide, the vast wings stir and spread above the gate like some demonic crown. A cavernous roar mingled with the thunder, and their contention shook the air. Then, like a steel gate falling, the rains came once more. And into the midst of them, as they crashed down upon him, Elof launched himself, catching a last glimpse of the others springing to the levers below. Then he could see no more than shadows. He hoped the rain would dim those yellow eyes as thoroughly. The cable snapped taut. A tremendous weight bore down on his back, and then suddenly eased as the longship slid down the sand and into the surf. Dimly he heard Trikar calling that all were now aboard. He could not answer, but took the strain once more, and felt the whole weight of the longship seek to haul him down. But it was afloat now, and the strain slackened as it began to move, sliding smoothly through the water behind him. He towed it as a small boat might, his wings mocking the rain with their powerful beat. It gathered speed more easily than he had feared, riding smoothly through the swell, and as the others settled at the sweeps, it fairly leaped forward. They had chosen it well, a craft of no great size, built more for speed and sea handling, for long journeys ending in swift assaults, rather than carrying huge cargoes or many men. In fact, it could have been any of the ships that had come gliding in towards Assenby so many years since. He laughed aloud at the irony of that, and the thunder seemed to laugh with him, mocking the ways of fate. No voice was raised from the shore. No shot was fired after them. The rain was still shielding them, scattering the lightning's glare. They turned in towards the point where the others awaited. There was a moment's alarm when an impact threw the rowers from their benches and caused the mast to waver like a grass stem in a gale. But they had only touched upon a hidden sandbar, and Elof still had enough power in his wings to haul them off and set them on course for the beach. They grounded alongside, and one party went to a nearby stream to fill the Ekwesh water breakers, while the others set about loading. They could not spare the time to unpack the sleds, so they laid down planks and hauled them bodily on board, though the half-decking seemed too light. As it turned out, only the last sled cracked it. The water-bearers came scurrying back and stowed the heavy water barrels beside their own lighter flasks of metal and thick glass.
"That's it,"
barked Trikar.
"Draw us off, Master Smith. To the oars all, and back water, fast, ere the rain slackens again."
Elof rose up and seized the bow line, but felt his wing beat falter as he took the strain. The oars were already thrashing against the surf. Urgently he heaved, felt the lean prow swing around to face the waves, lift and plunge. A gust of wind caught him then. His wings faltered and fluttered against it. He spread them wide and dived desperately for the deck. With no power in wing or leg to stop himself, he landed with bruising force. The wind got under his wings, dragged and skidded him across the tarred, greasy timbers, and almost over the far gunwales.
"More power!"
he gasped, as crewmen ran to hold down his wings and help him free of the metal harness.
"Can't help any more now."
"It doesn't matter," bellowed Rock in his ear, as the thunder drummed overhead. "Doesn't matter, do you hear? We're out! Headed out into the bay, out to sea! We're away!" Elof gave a great sigh. "Then their work is done," he said, and even over the storm there was no mistaking the regret in his voice. "And so they are clipped. On a ship this size, we can hardly build a fire big enough to fuel them. See them well stowed, Rock." He let the wings be slipped from his shoulders. "Lie there, my new life." He brooded a moment, while the deck plunged and the wind whined round him, but soon roused himself. "Ah, well, at least I'm still good for some labor. Help me to an oar bench, will you?"
"I don't doubt you could row the ship by yourself if you pleased. But why bother? Tricar'll be setting sail any minute."
"No, he mustn't. Help me to him." Rock shook his head, but helped him up, and they staggered aft together. Tricar stood on the after deck, clasping the steering oar in his corded old arms with no apparent effort. The moment Elof sighted him, he cried out, "No sail, shipmaster! Oars only, till dawn at the earliest, as I said." The old shipmaster frowned.
"But, Master Smith, in this rain—"
"And if it clears for a moment, they might miss a bare mast by night, but never the expanse of a sail. That's one reason." He slumped down against the gunwale and pointed. "And by all the powers, there's another." Out to sea, the rain was thinner, and through it they could just make out the high, pale outlines that seemed to muster around the mouth of the little bay.
"Sails,"
barked Trikar, clapping hand to the axe at his belt.
"And they're a size, by the powers! 3, 4, no more! A bloody fleet of the savages!"
Elof shook his head. "Not Aquesh. Those woven sails of theirs never look white."
"Then who—"
began Trikar. Then the lightning came again, and the truth glittered clear and bleak.
"Ice! Are those the ice islands you warned me of, Master Rock?"
"Aye," said Rock grimly,
"but twice the size of any we saw this far south. Why, with so much above the water, they must just about be touching."
"They are," said Elof bleakly. "I saw. The waves lashed them. They never moved. They are aground, a reef of ice." Trikar shook his head.
"You were right then, Master Smith. As well we didn't go sailing smack into those, in the dark and rain. Navigating them's a job for sweeps alone. Why, they're all around the gate."
He snapped his fingers.
"That's why you didn't find any fish. All around the gate, all around the inflow, the high falls. Think what they must be doing to the waters of the Yaskiennis." "Of course," breathed Rock. "This must be Louhi's doing. She's chilling it. So that's the plan you guessed, is it, Elof?"
But Elof shook his head. "A part of it, perhaps. A preparation." Then something boomed against the bows, and the ship lurched. Floating ice, even this far in.
"You've met this before, Master Smith," said Trikar shortly. "You give the orders."
3 men in the bows, with heavy poles or sweeps, barked Elof. "Shift what you can. Sing out to the steersman if you can't. Rock, you'd better be one of them, but help me do an oar first." It was hard to sit down at the bench, to grasp the rough wood of the sweep and turn his back on what must be happening at the bows, to fix his mind on the pace and rhythm of the shoulders that bent and strained before him, broken only when they must hurriedly back water, or push poles and sweeps against some cruel fragment of glacier. It was a fearful toil, for there were not enough rowers, but that he hardly noticed. As the time passed, he could look up and see through the veil of rain the white crags slip slowly by, their twisted summits aglitter with the lightning. It was more distant now. The storm seemed not to be following them out over the sea. So much the better. It would cover their escape all the longer, and give them a more peaceful ride. For all that it had played them some uncomfortable tricks earlier, in fact, it could hardly have served them better. The thought came to him so suddenly, he almost missed his stroke. earning the curses of the others on his side, but he hardly heard them. He was too busy thinking of the other flyers he had seen, remembering how even in the most deserted lands or skies, there had always been birds within sight, near or far, 2 birds, great birds, blackbirds, so great, so black, they could be seen easily from afar. More than once he had seen such a pair, and always on their traces rode a storm that was no common storm, that cloaked a cunning and a quirky mind, a power and a jester both. Then a hand on his shoulder startled him from his thoughts. Trikar was kneeling on the half-deck by his bench, and there was a young man's urgency in his voice. "Master Smith, Master Elof, I think we're through the worst of the ice islands. They're all afloat now, wider apart, save to the northward, and we can dodge those. But it must be drawing nigh to dawn." Elof looked up sharply, realizing that he had heard no thunder for some time. The rain was lessening, and the blackness beyond it was developing a definite grayish tinge. Then, "By all means, hoist sail, shipmaster, and get us away from here, on the wings of the wind." Trikar rose and bellowed orders, and the sweeps lifted from the water like rippling wings. Elof copied the others, shipping his in a shower of seawater. The chill of it stung him, and he shuddered. There was something there of the agony the ice caused him. Then Trikar bellowed again, and the other rowers shipped their oars and sprang for the halyards, leaving Elof helpless on his bench, wild with resentment at being unable to rise and see, though he could guess at what was going on easily enough. He heard the rough spar go rattling and creaking up the mast, and twisting round he saw the black sail billow and catch the wind. It filled with a dull thump, wholly unlike the crisp crack of the sailcloth he was used to. This black stuff was a much heavier and cruder weave, strengthened with a crosswise net of tarred cords. But it took the wind well enough. The yards sang taut, and beneath him the hull answered with a single deep drumming note. Water slopped and gurgled in the bilges, and the sleek ship sliced through the water like a flung knife. A wild cheer rippled the length of the ship. "Quiet!" barked Elof, and it was instantly quelled. He held up a hand, listening, but the sound he thought he had heard did not come again. He scrabbled and struggled to haul himself out of the benches, and Rock came running to help. "Why be quiet?" he demanded, as he hauled Elof bodily out of his seat. "We're away, aren't we? And you can't blame 'em for a shout or two. Crude these reaver craft may be, but they've a keen edge of speed on 'em. And we may need all we can get. Help me aft, Rock, and fast. They'll have discovered it's gone by now. There'll be pursuers combing the seas of the sunrise for us. Sound may reach them where sight cannot." Rock, helping Elof up into the stern castle, cast a worried glance at the sea, all shades of dull metal now, and at the land that had held them so long, dwindling now to a gray streak across the horizon, its hills no more substantial than the remotest band of clouds. "But surely we've a good start." He stopped. Elof was listening, gesturing urgently for quiet. The rumble that was borne down the wind might have been the last of the night's thunders, had there been any lightning with it. Over their ships, Yes. But look! All eyes followed Elof's hand, high into the glowing light. The dark storm clouds were breaking up now over the land, riven with gulfs of lighter gray. Through one of these a strange shape glided, serpentine, yet borne aloft on a wide spread of wings, more like bat than bird. So uncanny it seemed that it took them a moment to gauge the distance and realize how huge a thing it truly was.
Dragon,
Hissed Trikar, pale with horror.
Dragon hunts us.
As he would have sooner, had the sail been espied last night, said Elof absently, peering into the growing light. Again that ominous shadow crossed the cloud. Keep on your course. Do nothing else. He hasn't seen us. Not yet. And if he does, if only this wind doesn't drop. Somebody shouted. Out of the clouds, far nearer to them, far larger, the winged shape dropped like a spent arrow. Frightened gasps arose, and men looked to the side as if weighing the chill of the deeps against the venomous flame. But the dragon only hung there for a moment below the cloud canopy, vast wings sweeping between sea and sky. Then abruptly it turned and sped away eastward. Elof let go his breath and swayed a little. He fears to go further, lest he grows weary or is wounded. Dragons hate the sea, that waits to swallow them and their fires together, quenching them without effort. Not even at Loki's behest will he go further. And if he cannot catch us, their ships will also find it hard. So he sighed and turned to gaze out past the great bow platform, across a vast expanse of sea and sky to the farthest horizon, where air and water met and shadows of the night still lingered. Rock swallowed.
Then, that's it? No more than that?
A look of mild astonishment spread over his face, and he shook his head slightly, as if to clear an ear.
We've escaped. We're away.
He sat down upon the helmsman's bench, very hard. Elof nodded slightly. West by west-northwest. There lies your course, shipmaster. Trikar looked dubiously from the clear gray waters southward to the flow-strewn north, and back again, and scratched his head dubiously.
As your command, Master Smith. But it's a chill road. Bitter chill.
No more chill than the heart of Loki. No more bitter than the lot of men. Sail on. They gave that black ship no name, though it proved steadfast and strong, sliding through storm waves as lean and supple as an eel. For it was none of theirs, and they found it better not to think what might have passed upon those greasy planks. The altar pyramid of cemented stones on the stern castle was bare of all but dark ashes. But Elof cast it into the sea, and after it all the banners and shaman's gear he found, all bearing emblems of the Otter clan. The design on them was not unpleasing, showing well the sleek and sinuous movement of the beaver he knew. He had watched them sport and dive in the seas of his childhood, menacing none save the shellfish they broke between flat stones. Once the ancestors of the Akwesh, simple hunters themselves, had sought to identify with such creatures, seeing mirrored in them the qualities they valued, and their own place in nature. How had such a folk been twisted into predators, builders of a cruel empire, eaters of their own kind's flesh, feared servants of all nature's deadliest foe? All too easily, he reflected, for on that long voyage, he had ample time for such lonely musings. He had only to consider how the onslaught of the ice had begun to twist the folk of Caris, once noble and high of spirit, into the sorry images of the folk they fought. Between the Thade and the best of the Equish chieftains, such as those of the Raven clan, there was little enough to choose. And yet, however malformed, there still must be a great grain of humanity in the Equish somewhere, in their spirit of battle fellowship that gave them some discipline, perhaps their courage, or their sense of order and hierarchy. Yet it was with qualities such as those, lacking the mind sword of his own evil making, that Louhi bound the Equish to her service. Those and the lure of simple riches, and where all else failed, sheer terror. An unwholesome fellowship links those who have committed acts atrocious beyond the common course of men, those who in great peril have saved themselves at the cost of others, those who, starving at sea or in the wilds, have been driven to eat the flesh of their fellows, who have joined in some dark crime, or witnessed horrors beyond the bounds of nature. All these things the ice demanded of Equish warriors, through the medium of the shamans and the secret society of the hidden clan, with its masked ritual and mastery of magecraft, and it reinforced them with terrifying penalties. The best it left them was the somber pride and the warrior's honor he had met in the Raven clan. But still, somewhere, there lurked the spirit of the men who had watched the otters in the bright waters, and delighted in them. If he could somehow reach that. Such musings were a useful distraction from the monotonies and hardships of the voyage, and those were many. But there was nothing idle about them, and they were only one strand among his tangled thoughts. Their passage was swifter than it had been outward, for they met no greater perils than wind and rough weather, and made no detours, but sliced a smooth arc over the curve of the world, tacking across the chilly airs that float off the ice. With a crew able to stand 2 watches, the sailing was far easier. And though many of the young men had never before seen the ocean, they were northerners bred to it over thousands of years, and took to it at once. The black ship, though crude and simple in its building, proved steadfast and strong, sliding through storm waves like a serpent, shipping surprisingly little water over its low gunwales and between its planking. Their living space was uncomfortable, for the Equish made a fetish of hardihood, and scorned the least of civilized comforts. To the surprise of many, it was also scrupulously clean, for they had learned the need of this in conditions so cramped that disease could race like a forest fire. If there were pursuing ships, they never saw them, nor did they encounter any patrols. It seemed that Louhi had withdrawn them, perhaps to provide more manpower for her campaigns, perhaps also because of the ice islands that were gathering in such numbers now. "They'll freeze together come winter." Elof nodded, and leaned a little on the steering oar, swinging the black ship that much wider of the clustered floes. "And maybe next spring or 10 springs hence, they won't thaw apart again. And though they're blocked on the land, the glaciers will creep a bit further down across the sea. Rock eyed him dryly. By any chance would that be this plan of Louhi's you suspect? Elof frowned. A part, probably, he admitted unwillingly, but still not the core of it. I think I see it, but not clearly enough. Not yet. He tipped the helm back as the floes slipped by, watching a shadow creep back along a curiously carven disc of wood and bronze till it fell straight along the course he had marked. Rock looked at him a moment, then shrugged. As the weeks wore on, the ocean grew colder about them, so that even in high summer, rime formed upon rigging and spar by night, and by day was slow to disperse. In the northern skies, the ice glow burned balefully above the horizon like an unending banner of spiderweb, dimming the stars as they arose, a silent presence that preyed upon men's minds. Many of the crew grew anxious at their northward drift, and began to eye their fast-dwindling supplies with great concern. They could not understand, though Elof sought often to explain to them, the necessities of navigating across the curve of the world. Their minds, bounded all their lives by the walls of the Caris Vale, could scarcely comprehend distances so vast, and in confusion they grew distrustful. Even Trikegar, who had looked upon the oceans as a child, remembered only that there was some special art, and not what it involved. No man of his time had known it. He trusted Elof, however, and that kept his crew in check. At last, one chill morning, Elof took careful sight on the sun as it shone red through the swirl of freezing mist, and shouted to Trikegar to bring the ship about onto a new heading, west by west southwest. For this is the midpoint of our voyage. We need go north no longer. Now, for the south and home. From that day on, the climes grew warmer again, and though there were still rough weather enough to occupy them, their main concern was whether the food would last. We always knew it would be hard, Elof told the crew, when they must needs reduce their daily portions still further. We could not have carried more and still seized the ship so swiftly. But be steadfast, and I will make you all amends yet. Trikegar chuckled. We'll hold you to that, Master Smith. We've water still, though it's piss poor drinking, and water's the main thing. For the rest, a feast was never made the worse by a few days fasting first. But the water was down to the scummy dregs of the casks, and the fast had endured many days before the sunset came that brought their lookouts hail. The sinking sun flooded the sides with still flame, reddening the gray clouds till they turned to a glowing embers crusted with black. Fire ran among the steely waves till the black ship seemed to ride a path of metal half-molten. But at the apex of that path, hard to look at as the sun descended upon it, a dark streak showed at the wave's ending that seemed more solid than any cloud. The sun was almost down before those on deck glimpsed it, and then only for a moment ere the dark came. They were not sure. Hope stuck painfully in a parched throat, but the lookout was sure, as he came sliding merrily down the mast, and bade them hold their course and await the dawn. That night no man slept. So it was that when the first feeble light dimmed the sinking stars, the whole crew crowded the deck. They had seen little by night, moonless and cloudy, and now they quivered like hounds at the slip, thirsting and hungering for more than mere sustenance. When the clearing grayness showed them that shadow grown more solid still, the whole ship went wild. They laughed, they danced, they pounded Elof and Rock upon the back with bruising force. Both men scarcely noticed, for a deeper hunger yet burned within them. For hours it held them at the gunwale, their eyes fixed on the changing silhouette ahead. They were approaching the coast at a shallow angle, passing further southward the closer they drew, and they were torn between the urge to turn straight towards land, the more sensible course of waiting till they were nearer.
"We've got to be close to home,"
asserted Rock for the 20th time, twisting his fists about the gunwale till the layers of encrusted salt cracked and crumbled.
"We can't be far north, or we'd still have seen the ice glow."
Elof writhed uneasily on the crutches he had whittled from ship's timber. It was hard to set our southward course exactly. Too far south, and we come upon empty country, wild land, forest, desert even, or the salt flats of Davith Holden. Rock squinted up into the afternoon sky, shading his eyes against the declining light.
"You couldn't be that far out in your reckoning. Mad you may be, but not daft."
He tensed at a sudden hail from the masthead.
"What do you see?"
shouted Elof.
"Whither away, man?" "Head ahead, beyond the bows. Look! Oh, look!"
On a ship of their own land, they would have been able to scramble up the stern post, but the reaver ship lacked one. They could only wait long minutes, while the ship sailed on and the world seemed to hold its breath, all save the lookout, for he had become totally incoherent with excitement. But as what he had seen appeared above the horizon, a great shout went up of wonder and joy from all save Elof and Rock, for astonishment held them mute. This was not the land they had left, not far short of 9 years past, and yet beyond doubt, it was the city once called Morvanic, renamed Morvenhall. But now it seemed in truth that the ancestral seed of Morven, 1,000 years crushed beneath the ice, had risen and flowered into triumphant strength once again. Rock gulped.
"Is it real?"
Could all this have been shaped in a mere 9 years? Breathed Elof in wonder. Or have we been wanderers in time, as we have upon the oceans? Lesser than Caris, growled Trikgar softly. That ye told me, but not that it was like this. And you have brought us straight here. So entangled in wonders were they, that this further one seemed scarcely to matter then. It was only later that it came home to them, for dead ahead of them lay the promontory of Morvenhall, and across all the trackless wastes of the seas, Elof had set their bows straight towards it. But as they drew ever closer, they had few thoughts save for the majesty of the sight. They forgot empty bellies and parched throats, for their minds and their hearts were filled. All that Elof and Rock had looked to see was there. The smooth solidity of the outer walls with their rotund towers, cone-capped in gray, the streets and terraces rising up the flanks of the Ness, and at its crown, the lordly tower of the palace. They were still too distant to make out much detail, even in this clear afternoon light, but memories touched in what their eyes did not see. Yet those memories they began to doubt, for so much was overlaid upon them. They saw familiar pictures in new and splendid settings, but so contrived that their splendor only enhanced and dignified the older work. From behind the old walls, new walls arose, their stone vividly red gold in the clear light, and they spread out to embrace the land around and beyond the promontory, and the hills that overlooked it. On the slopes behind the nests, where tangled forest had encroached upon overgrown field, new streets wound their way up from the old, but they were tall, spacious, and widely separated. Between them both forest and field were maintained, each within their proper limits, save where they gave way to the familiar patterns of vineyard and orchard. It was an image of harmony, a contained balance of man and nature, such as Elof had never looked to see within a city wall. And as the palace crowned the promontory, so on each hill a tall tower rose out of the trees. Yet though they far overtopped it, they did not overwhelm it, but were set about it like standing sentinels to an enthroned lord, like flourishing youth about venerable age. Of ivory stone were their walls, their roofs of bronze capped with gold, and many a brave banner flew above them against the white clouds.
"Those are the towers of Kerbrahane," Rock burst out. "What magecraft transfers them here, right across the land? Copies, maybe? But where'd they get the stone? There's none like that here."
Elof shook his head in sheer wonder. Surely the Duergar have had a hand in this. Only they could achieve so much in so short a time.
"The Duergar?" whispered a young crewman nearby. "Is this a magical place, then?"
Nobody laughed.
"It's a peaceful one, anyhow," said Trikar contentedly. "That shows. We'd never get even this near to any city of Karis in a ship like this."
Elof and Rock exchanged shocked glances. They had both forgotten what manner of ship they were coming home in. Then they turned as one to look up at the black sail.
"One wins you 10, said Rock carefully. "That they're warming up our welcome this very minute."
Elof swallowed, remembering the lethal rams he had fitted to Kermorvan's great warship. And they would use them at full speed. By the time they got within hailing range, it would be too late.
"Even if they heeded any hails," grunted Rock. "Or they'd use catapults. One volley from the Prince Corentin would turn this hull into pick teeth. If we lowered the sail..."
"The Reavers do that before the attack, often enough."
"One ship against a city?" demanded Trikar.
"A city the Ekwesh have held within living memory," said Elof quietly. "Not an experience you forget. They might think us daft, but they'd still strike first, and hard."
"In the harbor!" cried the lookout. "A ship! A huge ship! Warp and about! Ready and sail!"
"That's it," said Elof decisively. "Head for the harbor mouth, and they'll smash us to flinders. Can't anchor outside, it's too deep. Sweeps or sail? We'll have to risk coming alongside the seawall, where they can't use the ram. Can we do it, shipmaster?"
Trikar grinned. "We can have a stab, Master Smith. but we'll be taking a slow pounding between waves and wool."
"Better that than the ram," said Rock fervently. "And I've few soft feelings about this ship, have you?"
"Well, she bore us no small way, and the skipper hates to lose any ship. But better that, as you say."
"To your places, the pock of you! We're going about."
The city was confident of peace. That was evident, for it had no warcraft in readiness. But by the time the black ship reached the seawall, the longship Saldenberg, next in size to the Corrington, was sweeping out of the mouth. "She'll have to tack ere she can come back at us," shouted Elof, helping Trikegar with the unwieldy steering oar. "If you can get us alongside at once."
"Any moment now, Master Smith,"
said Trikegar intently.
"Downhill a wee bit more. Let her go, there. Stand by to fend off, y'others."
The old shipman took a deep breath and bellowed,
"Now!"
The two of them leaned hard on the oar. The black ship swung sharply around, spilling wind from its sail. The waves caught it broadside and lifted it with a sickening lurch. A dark bulk loomed suddenly over the gunwale. There was a jarring impact, another, and still another that rattled their teeth in their heads. Then, as the ship lost way, the beating slowed down to a juddering scrape.
"Get that sail down,"
Trikegar ordered, and then, as the spars slithered down the mast, he breathed deeply again.
"That's it, Master Smith," he said. "You're home."
Elof bent over the oar and closed his eyes. There were stone steps set at intervals in the outer face of the wall, and to one of these they made fast, bow and stern. But even before the knots were tied, Elof was at the gunwales, and Rock helping him over. He hung on the steps a moment and looked back. Out to the sea the Saldenberg was coming about. By main force he hauled himself up the steps and collapsed over the top onto the flinty top of the wall. He felt it drum beneath him and looked up. The low sun dazzled him, but he saw a column of men come thundering down the narrow crest of the wall, a knot of horsemen at their head. He hauled himself up on his knees, waved and shouted, and to his infinite relief the horsemen reined in. The foremost so swiftly that his huge white mount reared in the narrow way, its hooves thrashing the air over Elof's head. He looked up, shading his eyes, and the world seemed to stand still in a moment of infinite silence.
"By the high gate!"
He still knew that clear voice at once.
"It's Elof!"
The tone of utter amazement was unmistakable.
"And Rock!"
Elof felt a sudden, inane, breathless laughter bubble up within him. "All hail, my lord," he managed to say, and lifted his hand in a limp parody of a formal salute. Then Rock was beside him, helping him up onto his crutches, and he was able to grin up into Kermorvan's face, slack with astonishment as he had seldom seen it. But as he took in Elof's condition, it set instantly in shock, and his gray eyes grew bleak and hard. "Who has done this to you?" he demanded, and swung down from his saddle to seize Elof's hand in his own iron grip. "Who has done this?" he repeated, and glared at the black prow beneath. Elof shook his and forced himself to find words. "No. These are friends, none better. And I ask you to welcome them. They are men of Caris. Aye, Caris," he repeated,
seeing shock flicker across Kermorven's face. As to who did this, don't concern yourself. That score is settled forever. Kermorven raised an eyebrow, then nodded. And Kara? He asked softly. Elof shook his head. Kermorven looked down. Truly, I am sorry. And Ills? Elof asked hastily. But he had hardly got the words out when the gaggle of men around them burst apart as a short figure bounded through and slammed into Elof with a force that would have knocked him over into the harbor had the arms embracing him been less strong. He swayed, breathless, all too aware of the body pressed against him, sturdy and square and thoroughly female, of the pert face laughing up at him through though it was streaming with tears. The lady, said Kermorven carefully, appears to be very well. Elof, she gasped. They were yelling about Reavers, so I thought I'd not leave all the fun to him. But you? What? Where? Elof rumpled her curls affectionately, unable to find the right words. As fair as ever, he said lightly, though his own eyes prickled. You haven't changed by a hair, as if it's only been a few months, which I guess it has, in your terms. It hasn't seemed so, Ills whispered. We thought you were dead. You imbecile, idiot, you human. You note, of course, remarked Kermorven in an elaborate aside to Rock, that no such compliments came to us. Rock, equally straight-faced, spread his hands helplessly. Nor that sort of greeting my way, my lord. Seems we're just hangers-on. Bystanders, amplified Kermorven. Forgotten men. Ills tore loose and whirled on Rock with her clenched fist darting at his middle. I'll give you greeting, you tub of lard, she snapped, then flung her arms around his neck and kissed him with a force that lifted his bulky frame from the ground, leaving him scarlet-faced and staggering. Kermorven's reserve shattered. He gave one of his rare shouts of laughter and spread his arms wide to embrace them all. Peace, you madmen all! By the sign of the sun, it's good beyond measure to have you both back. Then he pulled free, gesturing up at the town. I must countermand the alert, he said, before too much panic spreads. Trikar, who had scrambled up onto the wall, coughed. And the warship, my lord. May we bring our prize in before the waves break her? And without some fool unleashing a volley, nodded Kermorven. Yes, you may. He turned to one of the horsemen. See, they are all signaled at once, Athean, and the guards stood down. The young aide saluted and cantered away. Trikar bowed and was about to return to the ship when Kermorven laid a hand on his arm. You are of Karis, a shipmaster by the cut of you, who has helped my friends voyage back across this vast ocean? Trikar bowed again. My lads and I, Trikar at your service, shipmaster as you guessed. My privilege, my lord, and some amends for the hard welcome my land gave them. Kermorven shook his head, stern face. That should not fall to such as you, sir. Our debt to you remains. Elof grinned. They might be interested in settling here.
if you've a need of more seamen, my lord, though I have never seen the like of these great ships of yours. Glamorgan pursed his lips judiciously. And there I was wondering how I might persuade you. I always need more shipwise men, and those who have crossed an ocean. But for now, go bring in your ship to the quayside there, and then toil no more. You and yours will be our honored guests. There is much to be told, I see. And much to be done, answered Elof. Caris is in peril, and its peril may be ours also, and that of all the world. For what I suspect is true, though he is on the verge of victory, of tipping the balance decisively in favor of the ice. I think I know how she means to achieve it. We must take counsel at once. Kermorvan nodded. So be it. My lady, you have your mount? We'll ride up to the palace. A more fitting place for your welcome than out here, at any rate. Dismount, you two, and let us have your horses. Then arrange carriage for the crew when they reach the quay. As Kermorvan turned aside to give his orders, Tryggar plucked Elof by the sleeve. So, that's your king. Younger than I'd bargained for, but a fine man regardless. There's one to follow, if any. And this land of yours looks worthy of him, aye, and yourselves as well. You've kept your pledge, Master Smith. They invited the old shipmaster to join their council, but he declined, much amused, saying it was late in life for him to start meddling in princely matters. So they left him with their thanks to bring in the black ship, and mounted up to return to the palace. Help the master smith up there, Kermorvan commanded. You can ride pinion with me, or rock, if you prefer. Neither, by your leave, growled Elof, hating the indignity of bumping through town at someone's saddleback. Just get me into the saddle, and bind my feet loosely into the stirrups, so. He swayed in the saddle. He had not ridden for too many years, and his legs had grown weak. It gave him some sense of freedom, but nothing compared to flying. He looked up at the tower atop the promontory, and hungered for his wings, longing to soar about it as he had with Kara long ago, to take in all this new city from above, laid out like a living tragedy. Rock cocked an eye at him. Sure you won't come a cropper? I'm all right. I may have to sit like a sack of meal, but I can still clasp with my knees, so I'll manage. But, Tryggar, will you see my wings safely unloaded and sent after me? Many thanks. Wings? Inquired Kermorvan with innocent interest, then held up a hand. No, not a word. I can see I will have to hear all this from the beginning to make sense of it. So to the palace, without delay. The little cavalcade trotted off down the seawall toward the city. Elof winced as he saw crowds flocking along the wider end of the wall. It might have been the alarm that brought them out, but they were evidently staying to cheer. Many came rushing out to hurl flowers or clasp hands with the returning seafarers, and Elof was surprised to hear the accents of Kerbrahane thoroughly blended with those of the East, and see so many brown-skinned folk of Nordney in harmony with both. To them he was an especial hero, and he spoke to them in their own dialect. Strangest of all, though, was to see Duergar among the ranks of men. They make us welcome here, said Ilse, slipping her plump hand into Elof's.
Even the folk of Kerberheim are learning that we are not vermin, working with us to rebuild. The towers? Ills nodded. When the West was abandoned at last, the syndics did not wish to leave the Eqwesh such a strong place. They were going to throw down wall and tower, but we offered to bring the towers east and rebuild them. It was the Long Lad's idea, and a good one. That more than anything made us friends. It took 2 years with the fleet, and they're not yet finished, but it was time well spent. We took charge of much of the other construction also, and taught their masons a thing or two, their smiths also. But we have never found any to match you, Elof. To have you back. She squeezed his hand hard. He looked down into her dark eyes. To be back, my lady. It seems more than I deserve. But my heart tells me I must not stay. Not now. She sat silent for a moment. Is it only your quest that draws you? She asked at last. Or is there other reason? There is, and you shall all hear it. You, especially, Ills. For it concerns matters in which the Duergar are wise. I will hear, she said, and yet I could find it in me to deny all, if it would persuade you to stay. Then, as they neared the end of the wall, Rock let out a startled oath and pointed. Ahead lay Plen Perthau, the landfall square, where the tall statues of the Watchers stood. But it had changed. On its farther side, where a block of rather dilapidated storehouses had stood, there was now a park of many young trees. But it was not that alone which startled them. For out of the trees, tall and grim, rose what was unmistakably the Tower of Vade, that had stood in Kerberheim for well nigh 1,000 years. And at its foot, along the seaward edge of the park, stood 2 more statues, in line with the Watchers, and of no less stature, upon a common plinth. The faces were living likenesses of Rock and Elof. Across the base were carved the words Mahar Dasunians. In the hope of return, said Elof, deeply moved, in the northern tongue. And then he saw that there was a third place on the dais, standing empty. That one is not yet finished, said Ills tonelessly. Not even my folk can easily capture so fair a likeness in stone. Elof did not reply, nor would he look at her as they rode on towards the palace. I scarcely know what to make of it, said Kermorven, when after some hours all was told to his satisfaction. He stretched out a long hand and poured more wine for them all. Save that I grieve for the sorrows of that ancient land, and for yours no less, Elof. But I would fear you if you were not my friend. Elof made no answer. They sat in Kermorven's own apartments, at the summit of the palace, overlooking the harbor far below. The king held up his own goblet to the falling sun, watching the dark wine turn the faceted glass to a fire ruby. Now I have heard what you have heard, seen with your eyes, yet I still do not perceive this plan of Louhi's. I find only dark suspicions. Why so? Elof sought to rise, and sank back angrily. He had a great need to pace the room. He felt pent with energy, like one of his crystals, with no way to release it. I still have doubts myself. They made me slow to voice my thoughts, and yet He wrung his fingers tightly. Yet I am sure the swelling of the earth fires. I noted that, said Kermorven. What caused it, think you? The ice, Elof answered curtly. Kermorven shrugged. Very likely. But how? Lohi's power is the reverse of heat, as you yourself. The table quivered as the flat of Elof's hand cracked down, and the glasses rang. Not Lohi, the ice. That vast bulk of frozen water spread across the land. Have you ever thought what it must be doing to it? Grinding it down, began Rock, but Elof overtook him. And then, lying on its new base, still carrying all the weight it's ground away, and all its own great weight of frozen water as well, what must it be doing to the land beneath it? Crushing it down, that's what. Kermorven snapped his fingers. And forcing the earth fires up. Squeezing them out like juice from a fruit, Rock chipped in. Yes, that'd be it. They'd come boiling up, as the furnace fires did. And the Vale of Karis is rich in the fires, as Rock found out. They run in a great line right across it, almost straight in places, a seam in the earth itself. And now every single breach on that seam is cracking, every fire mountain erupting skyward. Aye, but what's the ice to do with such fires? Surely they'd hinder more than help. No. Remember what we guessed, and what Lohi herself boasted to me? The ice seeks to chill the world by mirroring back a great part of the sunlight that falls upon it. But it cannot chill enough to allow the ice to spread without check. Not yet. In free lands, formed by the sun, the seasons hold the balance. The winters at their worst are neither cold enough nor long enough to advance the ice further than the summers can melt back. And the sun is a sign of hope, warming the hearts and minds of men. That Lohi fears almost as much. But if she could find a way to block off that sunlight... The clouds of ash, said Kermorven. But surely they only rise briefly, and not fall. Not the finest ash. It was all around me in the upper airs, and higher still, as high as I could see. At that height, it must hang there for days. Years, said Ilse unexpectedly. My people know of this. The airs owe their color to the dust they bear, and the sunlights are known to grow more colorful after truly great eruptions. The effect may last years. She sat up suddenly. And many have thought this may affect the climes as well. By filtering the sunlight, blocking its richness a little, but no more than a little, a few wet summers, a trifling time. That could not aid the ice very much. Elof shook his head grimly. One eruption, no. But along the length of Karis, I passed by something like 20. Not counting, he grimaced. One more I unleashed myself. And these eruptions are continuous, not dying, but growing, spreading, laying waste the land about. All that in one small region. Small compared with the rest of the world, anyway. The last few winters have been terrible, long and cold, pure chance, perhaps. But every year, the ice islands have been coming further south, till now they are lodging in the very inflow of the great river. Kermorven stared into his wine a moment, then downed it in one single draught. "I understand now," he said softly. "I believe you are right, though it is hard to think on such a scale. But not so for the ice, no doubt. But if it is so gradual, what makes you think the balance will be tipped so soon?" "For several reasons. First, because Louhi told me the ice need only advance a little further. Second, because the upsurge of the earth fires has been so sudden and violent only in this last year. And thirdly, though I am less sure of this, because Louhi was relaxing her war against Karis, because she was ready to conclude a show of peace with me as the price." Kermorven tapped his fingers on the table. "Let me see if I follow that. It cannot have been only out of revenge. She must have feared you could thwart her, somehow. But how, by the high gates?" Then he slammed down his fist. "That's how! Thanks to you, this man Nethade had driven back her armies, defied the worst she could do. Another season, and he might have assailed her in the gate itself, and that she could not risk, because she must have that place to be sure of freezing the great river." Elof sat back with a sigh. The gate! That was the missing piece of the pattern. That was what I did not understand. And it comforts me, for as you say, she must have had the next season in mind, just as Tapaiao warned. I feared she might strike sooner. Ilse shook her head. "Unlikely. She will need time to build up a great enough cloud. There will be no mistaking it then. It will hang like a pall over the land. Nor would she waste its power striking in summer, when its effect is least. Most likely she will wait till the end of winter, and then build it up gradually to prevent a thaw." "So we've got some time," Rock demanded. "Fine. But how can we use it? That's the question. How thwart a power that turns earth and air against us? Elof, you said you'd some idea." "A weapon. It might help, though mere men cannot assail the whole mass of the ice." "But the gate," demanded Kermorven. "The gate is her weak point here. What men built, men may assail." He rose abruptly and strode to the window, surveying the city that was his life's achievement. "Less than Karis or Morven we may be, but where they are sundered, we are united. Where they have faltered or fallen, we stand free. We have a fleet great enough to bear the strongest force we can raise across the seas of the sunrise. And we have you, Master Smith of the skilled hand, and your weapons. They may give our spear shaft its striking head. That spear we shall cast into the balance of the world. Then let us see which way it turns."